All right. At this point, everybody is muted out. The call is being recorded. We're going to go ahead and get started. Well, welcome, everybody. If you're not sure where you're supposed to be right now, this is the call where we're talking about push periods, and specifically we're talking about mastering the phone. And I'm sitting outside in front of somewhat of a busy street. Hopefully it's not too difficult to hear me. But I'm looking forward to sharing the very best ideas that I have with all of you on kicking butt on the phone during a push period. I'm going to go ahead and dive in. At this point, I believe I have muted everybody out. If for some reason I didn't successfully do that, if you can do whatever you can to mitigate any background noise on your end, that would be great. So the topic today is the phone. You want to make sure to have pen and note paper handy. I've got a lot to share. I will open it up at the end for Q&A, but at this point, it is time to go ahead and begin. The first thing I want to share with all of you about the phone during a push period is actually just it's a personal reflection on my experience when I think back to some of the huge push periods that I had. And one of the things that I can remember was my first manager pulled me to the side, and he explained to me that during a push period, a good way of thinking about it is that all I'm really doing is I'm now treating this job like any other person treats a normal job when they clock in at the beginning of the day or they show up for their 9-to-5 office job. My first manager, Dan Cassetta, used to point out that, in a push period, I might feel like I'm working a lot because I start by making calls at the beginning of the day. I'm doing appointments and making calls all day throughout the day. But he often reminded me that all I'm really doing is I'm actually just starting to work this job as hard as most people work their typical jobs. And so I share that with all of you because I think that's a good reminder to have, that when you think about working really hard and what you're made of or what you're capable of or doing more than you've ever done, sometimes it's good to have a healthy perspective and to remind ourselves that, well, you might just be going from having worked this job part-time to a little closer to doing it a little bit more full-time. So that's just something I wanted to point out about the psychology that I had when I convinced myself that, hey, I'm going to do everything I can for 2 weeks and see what I'm made of. That was just a good reminder to have. I want to start today by also talking about the psychology around when you make your phone calls. I know a common question that comes up is, well, when's a good time to reach people, or when's a good time to make phone calls? And some of you have heard me answer that question by saying, anytime you have your phone and you're not on a demo, well, that's phone time. And on one hand, I think that's true. If you're trying to sell more than you've ever sold before, then phone time is whenever you're not on an appointment. Now, let me break down to all of you some of the different pros and cons or advantages and disadvantages of making phone calls at different times during the day. And I'll preface this by reminding you that when I was in a push period, I would start by making calls at the beginning of the day. I'd make them until I had to go to an appointment. I'd make them throughout the day, and then I'd make them at night. But I think it's also important to also recognize what you're going to experience when you make calls at different times. So first of all, let's talk about morning phone time. When I first started selling Cutco, I didn't do any morning phone time. I was only making calls in the evening, not for any particular reason. It's just the way I was working. And when another FSM in the office introduced me to morning phone time, I found it interesting that he shared with me that it was actually the only time that he ever made calls. And I asked him, I said, well, why do you do all your calls in the morning? He said one particular reason. He said, I've found that in the morning, when I get a hold of people, they haven't had a chance yet to get into a bad mood. He goes, when I call them later in the day, it's easier for them to have had a bad day. He goes, in the morning, I feel like people are in a better mood. Now, I don't know if there's really any truth to that or if that was just his particular perspective, but it's an interesting thought that in the morning, people are in a different mindset than they are throughout the rest of the day. If we want to talk about it a little bit more practically, one of the great things about morning phone time that I found is it's the best way to fill appointments in your schedule the same day. So you want to think about morning phone time as that's how you fill in your same-day appointments. And the nice benefit of making calls in the morning and scheduling appointments for the same day is you're going to have a much lower cancellation rate or no-show rate from somebody who you talked to an hour ago or 2 hours ago compared to an appointment that you set 1 or 2 or 3 days in advance. So there's a ton of advantages to making morning phone time a regular practice. But I think it's important that you recognize these things because they make a big difference. Let's talk about the difference when you make phone calls all throughout the day. So anytime after maybe 9 a.m., before 5 or 6 p.m., all throughout the day. One of the things that's great about making phone calls throughout the day is when you get a hold of people, they're less likely to be rushed like they might be in the morning trying to get out to work or get their kids to school or whatever it might be. And they're also less likely to be distracted by if they're eating dinner or doing something at the end of the day. So you have an opportunity to get people in the middle of the day where they might not be as rushed or not as distracted. The other thing is people are often, they're used to getting phone calls throughout the day or during the day. That's a more normal time that people are used to getting calls. Now there's pros and cons to that. The advantage is it's very normal for someone to get a phone call. The disadvantage, or that actually shows another reason why it's a good idea to call in the morning or the evening, because someone's less likely to be interrupted by another phone call. All right? Those are a couple advantages to making calls all throughout the day. Now let's talk about making calls in the evening. A couple things to think about. The obvious advantage is people are much more likely to be available, or it might seem that way. One of the things that's different from when I was a rep versus today is back when I sold Cutco, when I would get referrals, I mostly got home phone numbers. You know, nowadays my guess is most of you are getting cell phone numbers. So that's kind of changed the game a little bit. But for me, I was working with mostly home phone numbers, so calling people in the evening was much more of a necessity because if they were out during the day, back when I was selling, we didn't have cell phone numbers. But if you have a cell phone number, when you get a referral, then that changes the game. You should be calling people all day, every day. Now, when I was scheduling myself during a push period or even during a non-push period, the first thing I would do is I'd schedule when I would make my phone calls. And what I'm going to share with all of you today is I'm going to give you some very deep insights into scheduling. I'm probably going to share some things that are unconventional. I'm probably going to give you some insight into scheduling that's really advanced. It's probably a lot more than you've ever thought about it before. But I'm going to tell you that if you want to find a way to do 5, 6, 7, 8 appointments every single day, you have to really be thoughtful about your scheduling. So that's what we're going to talk about right now is the thinking that goes into scheduling. And this is far more advanced than, especially those of you who are brand new right now, I'm going to melt your brains out of your ears, okay? So you got to be careful with this stuff because this is a lot to think about all at once. But my imagination tells me if you're sitting here on the phone at 8:45 a.m. on a Friday to learn how to sell knives, you came here to get the goods. So I'm going to give you the goods. So first of all, let's talk about scheduling at different days or different times your phone sessions. First things first, when I would schedule during a push period, I would start by scheduling phone time every evening between usually 6:30 and 9 p.m. and every morning between usually 7:45 and 9 a.m. And I would only remove a phone session from my schedule if I had enough appointments set up at least 2 days out that I didn't need to have that phone session. But if it was a Monday night and I had all of Tuesday booked, but I only had half of Wednesday booked, I would still keep that Monday night phone session because I always tried to put myself in a position where I didn't have to rely on that night to fill the next day. If you follow what I'm saying, my goal is always to stay a couple days ahead with my scheduling. So I would start by scheduling phone sessions every morning, every night, and there were a few critical phone sessions that no matter what the situation, I would always keep them. And the obvious ones were Sunday evening, Tuesday evening, and Thursday evening. And the reason why is because Sunday evening was a great time to set up the whole week. Tuesday evening was great to set up the second half of the week. And then Thursday ensured that I had a full weekend if I was trying to work every day. So you got to make sure that you're conscientious of when are you going to have your phone sessions, and don't let anything get in the way of those phone sessions. I will also argue that even if you have a customer that says, I'm going to buy an ultimate set, but I can only see you Sunday at 7 p.m. or I can only see you Thursday at 8 p.m., I will tell you right now, do not schedule that demo. You're far better off getting in a quality phone session where you could schedule multiple people that you're going to sell to versus being tempted by that one demo that's going to now replace all the others that you would have scheduled. So something important to think about there. Now, I'm talking to you about the importance of having these phone sessions scheduled, not letting them get interrupted. I'm going to tell you that during a push period, you know, a lot of these rules or guidelines, they kind of go out the door. And again, your goal is to be making phone calls all the time if you're not on an appointment. I'm going to give you another couple thoughts here around scheduling that are just different topics related to scheduling, but you want to make sure you get these down. One of them has to do with keeping your past customer list handy. So and this is something that I didn't just do in a push period. In fact, just about everything I'm teaching all of you today, it wasn't push period specific. It was how I managed my whole vector career. But I would always have my past customer list with me, and the advantage of doing that is when you're out and about between appointments, if you have your past customer list with you, you can call them and drop in with a moment's notice. I could call a customer and say, hey, I'm actually going to be in your neighborhood in a couple hours. I'd be happy to drop by and service your knives. So many of you who've heard stories of how I regularly, not just in a push period, but throughout my Cutco career, I would have 6, 7, 8, 9 appointments a day. One reason is because I would regularly wake up with 3, 4, or 5 appointments set, but then what would happen is I would schedule people all throughout the day continually as I was on the road. So always have your customer list with you. All right, now's when you guys get the advanced stuff. That was the basic. That was 101 on scheduling. Now is your advanced training 5 on scheduling. When you sit down to make phone calls and you're getting prepared, one of the things that you want to focus on is you always want to be optimizing when and where you do appointments based on geography, based on traffic patterns, and based on where your customers are. All right, I'm going to say that again. When it's time to sit down and schedule your appointments, you always want to optimize your scheduling based on geography. Where do people live? All right? Don't schedule one demo on one side of town at 9 a.m. and then think, well, hey, I've got another great lead on the other side of town, so I'll schedule them at 1 p.m. The problem with doing that is if you don't have appointments in between, or if you're not managing how and where you have to drive or traffic patterns, you're not being smart with your time. So when I sat down to make phone calls, I would always look at my leads in a number of different ways. I would look at them in terms of where did people live, and then I would look at where they lived based on traffic patterns. And you want to be really thoughtful about these things. So here's a couple things to think about related to geography and traffic patterns. If your first appointment is either early in the morning or potentially you're going to have to deal with traffic, here's a suggestion I would give you, is drive to that appointment. Let's say it's a 9 a.m. appointment or 8 a.m. appointment or 8:30 a.m. appointment. If I'm in a push period and I have an 8:30 a.m. appointment, I'm going to get there at 7:30 a.m. And the reason why is so I can still do my morning phone time. Because in a push period, I'm making calls every morning without exception. So you don't ever want an early appointment to be an excuse not to get your phone calls in. You drive there and you get there an hour early so you can at least squeak out 10, 20, or 30 phone calls before that first appointment. If you need to schedule a demo that's far away from where you live or far from where you're starting the day, here's something to make sure you're very thoughtful of. If you've got to schedule somebody where it's a long drive, it's 45 minutes, an hour, hour and a half, something like that, make sure that that's it's either your very first appointment of the day, and then you schedule the rest of your appointments to work back towards where you're going to finish the day, or the other way around. The key, though, is you don't want to schedule your appointments so that the way you've scheduled becomes an excuse to not get to your phone time at the end of the day. So in other words, what I'm saying is, if you're going to schedule yourself in a certain way where you're not going to end up near the office at the end of the day, you still need to block off time to make calls, and don't make up excuses that says, well, I couldn't make calls because I was driving back from my last appointment. That's just an excuse or a lame reason. If you had an appointment that's 2 hours from your house, you're the one that scheduled it that way. You should still take responsibility to sit there and make calls that night until 9 and then drive home. So now you can see why I'm suggesting be really thoughtful about when you schedule, because you don't want your scheduling to become your excuse for when or how you don't do phone time. All right? And when you're thinking about where you're scheduling these appointments that are far away, make sure you're always looking at traffic patterns. Because another excuse that you don't want to come up with is, oh, well, I got stuck in traffic, or there's always traffic going this way. There's a phrase that I love, and it's called living off-peak. As an example, nobody with any brains goes to the Department of Motor Vehicles or the Bureau of Motor Vehicles Friday at 4 p.m., right? You go Wednesday at 8 a.m., right? Or if you're scheduling flights and you have a choice, you don't fly out Saturday at 3 p.m., you fly out, Tuesday at 1 p.m. The point is, don't do things when everybody else is doing them. That's called living off-peak. All right, something to think about. All right, let's talk more about scheduling psychology or philosophy. And now, this is obvious, but it's very easy to overlook this. When you're scheduling your demos or your service calls, always schedule them in pockets as close together as possible. All right, so your goal is, hey, if I'm going to start calling people that live in this area, or I'm going to try and be in this area at this time of day, your goal is to optimize that particular portion of your day. So make sure you're being thoughtful about scheduling people together in pockets. When you're scheduling service calls, here's an idea for you. Use windows when you schedule a service call. Now, this is kind of a controversial idea, but I'd highly recommend you do this. Now, when I say use windows, let me tell you what I mean by that. When all of us were brand new, we learned how to schedule our demos by using exact times. We'd tell the customer, hey, I'm going to see you at either 1:15 or 3:45. Which is better for you? And there's a lot of reasons why it's a good idea to use exact times when you're scheduling a demo. In fact, one of the tricks that we used to use is we would tell the customer, I'll see you at 1:13 or 3:42, just to find another way to be interesting or different or to catch their attention. And if they ask, well, why is it 3:42? Then with a smile, you tell them, well, I'm always late, so it's better I just tell you exactly when I'm going to get there. And you have fun with that, right? But when you're scheduling a service call, if you schedule the service call the right way, and I'll give all of you my service call phone approach in a couple minutes, but if you use the approach I'm going to give you, your service calls are going to be happy that you're coming. And when you schedule them, it'll give you the flexibility to say, Mrs. Jones, most service calls, whether it's your cable company or the water company or whatever it might be, whether it's your cable or your internet or if you had a plumber come out, Ms. Jones, they're going to tell you they're going to be there between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Bit of an exaggeration, but I do it to make a point. I say, Ms. Jones, here's what's awesome. I can actually guarantee I'm going to get there within a 42-minute window. And, again, you can have fun with that. Use an exact number. And you say, I can guarantee I'm going to be there within 42 minutes, 37 minutes. And what's interesting is if you use the law of contrast, the law of contrast says whenever you compare a larger number to a smaller number, the larger number always makes the smaller number look smaller, or vice versa. So when you remind the customer, Ms. Jones, if you had a plumber come out or your cable fix, hey, they're going to tell you they're going to be there between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., I can actually guarantee I'll be there within a 41-minute window. You're actually making yourself sound like a hero. The interesting thing is many of you listening right now may have never thought of doing it that way. You're used to guaranteeing them you're going to be there at a certain time. Here's the advantage of scheduling service calls using windows. The advantage of doing that is it allows you to schedule more of them closer together. And then what you can do is once you're on the service call, you can make the decision on a case-by-case basis as to whether or not that particular service call is one that you really want to invest your time into trying to sell them something. Let me ask all of you a question. How many of you have had this happen before? You show up at a service call and you realize real quickly, man, I've got great rapport with this lady. I can tell that if I really spend some time with her, I'm going to sell something. And have you ever found yourself caught in a hard place where you realize you could sell something, but you're also rushing yourself to get to your next appointment? Well, what I'm sharing with you right now about scheduling service calls using these windows, let me give you an example. I'd schedule a service call at 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 10 a.m., and 11 a.m. And I would tell every one of those customers, you give them all a 30 to 45-minute window. Now, here's what's interesting. The 8 a.m. appointment, I'm almost always going to show up 15 to 20 minutes early, because when you start using windows, it actually gives you the advantage of being a little more flexible with your customers. They weren't expecting an exact time. They're probably not going to be upset if you show up 15 to 20 minutes early. So, or let's say the first one's not at 8 a.m., but let's say it's 9, 10, 11, and 12. So that 9 a.m. appointment, I'm actually going to get to their neighborhood at 7:45 a.m. I'm going to make calls from 7:45 to 8:30 or 8:40, and then I'm probably going to knock on the door around 8:40, 8:45. Then I will make the judgment, should I dig in and take the time to sell, or if I realize, you know what, for whatever reason, you've all had this, I'm on this service call and I realize it's not going to make a difference, I don't need to dig in, or I can get the sale quickly, or I'm not going to get the big sale, now I can move on and get to my next appointment and make that same decision again. But by managing my service call appointments that way, it gave me the flexibility to maneuver based on how things were going. All right? Let me give all of you another thought here on scheduling. I thought I had this in my notes, but I don't see it in my notes. So let me give you another thought around scheduling. I mentioned earlier the whole idea of scheduling people based on pockets. All right? Here's what that means when you're actually doing your phone time. When you're doing your phone time, and when I say pockets, I mean geographical pockets, right? If you have a bunch of leads that live in one town, you're trying to see all of them at the same time. You shouldn't be driving back and forth across town. That's not smart. So when you're sitting down making your phone calls, what that means is, here's what that actually looks like. When you're calling somebody, you don't just have one choice of two different times. So let's say I'm making phone calls on Sunday night. I'm looking at my calendar and I'm looking at it going, okay, this particular set of leads that I'm going to call right now, they live in this area. And I know that I'm going to try and be at this area on Monday during the first half of the day. I'm probably going to try and be there Tuesday during the second half of the day, and then maybe on Wednesday the first half of the day. So when I'm sitting down to call these leads in these areas, I'm actually mentally prepared, not with one choice of two times, but with actually two or three different choices of two times. That's a little bit more preparation than what a lot of you might be used to. But the point is, you know that you're not always going to get the appointment when you want it, so you always need to be prepared for when are the next options that you're going to want. Because I don't know if any of you have ever done this. I've done this. I'm not prepared, and what ends up happening is they don't take my first two times, so then because I hadn't thought through it, I give them the next two times, and then I realize after I hang up, I I shouldn't have scheduled them there. But a lot of the times it was my own lack of preparation as to why I didn't get them where and when I wanted them. So when you're making your phone calls, I'll reiterate this. Don't just have a choice of two times prepared to ask somebody. Yes, you're only going to ask them for two times, and then if you get an objection, you'll go on to the next two times. But you've got to think in advance, when are these different pockets of times that you're going to see somebody? That's a level of planning that you probably weren't doing when you were brand new, something to think about. All right, another thought here on scheduling psychology. Do not be afraid to double book appointments. Now, this is the point at which your manager is wondering if they should just hang the phone up. Double booking appointments. What is he talking about? When I say double booking appointments, I'm not talking about doing this as a regular practice. What I'm suggesting here is if you get somebody on the phone and you can tell based on that conversation, this is a really quality lead, there's a good chance they're going to buy something, and they're going to buy something big. It's okay if they tell you they can only see you at a certain day at a certain time, and if based on geography and traffic patterns and everything else, it works for you, but the only problem is you already have an appointment there, there's nothing wrong with giving away that appointment to the better option. And then what you do is you call back the other person and just let them know, hey, something's come up. And then you just say, I was looking forward to seeing you at 9 a.m., but something's come up. Could I see you instead at 10:30 or 1 p.m.? So don't be afraid if you're talking to an A-plus lead to give up another spot, because one of the things the top rep is always doing is every time they schedule an appointment, they're always making some sort of note, whether it's a physical note or a mental note, is to, hey, is this appointment going to be an A-plus, an A, an A-minus, a B-plus, a B? You always want to be ranking them because you never know when you're going to get that A-plus person saying, hey, I can only see you at this time. All right. Let's shift gears here. I'm going to give all of you a service call approach that should enable you to schedule service calls 9 out of 10 times. All right, and I'll open up for Q&A. If any of you have questions about this, I'm happy to help out here. But here's the service call approach that for me, if you gave me 10 people who own Cutco, I could get a service call with at least 9 or 10 of them. Oh, there's an ambulance going by here. Hold on one sec. All right, cool. All right, so here's the service call approach. Customer answers the phone. Once I get Mrs. Jones on the phone, I say, Mrs. Jones, I'm sorry that I did not call you sooner. That's the first words out of your mouth. I'm sorry that I did not call you sooner. Right? And so now you immediately have somebody's attention. Say, Mrs. Jones, I actually am calling on behalf of Cutco, and I'm calling about a service that you paid for back when you bought your knives. So now you've got their attention. And you notice I'm not telling them I'm calling you about something that's free. I think that's a big mistake. Because when you tell somebody that something is free, let me ask all of you a question. Do you value it more or less when somebody says something's free? You value it a lot less. If I call you and say I'm calling about something you already paid for, does that make you value it less or more? It makes you value it more because you feel like you paid for it and you want to get your money's worth. So I'd always start by saying, hey, I'm sorry I didn't call sooner. I'm actually calling about a service that you paid for back when you bought your products, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. Even if you don't know, it doesn't matter. And then the very next thing I'll say is, you do live on blank street. Is that correct? If I know the street. If I know the town. You do live in this area. Is that correct? And then whatever they say next, I say, great. I'm actually going to be on your street anyways. That's a great line. I'm going to be in your area anyways, because you want them to feel like it's not a big deal. It's real easy to make all this happen. It's not a big ordeal. So I'm going to be on your street anyways at this time or this time. And then I close the service call. I say, what's the time that you'll be there for me to touch up your knives? And if I feel like I need to, I might also pre-frame the objection. Hey, you may or may not have noticed that they need servicing, but it's kind of like an oil change. You definitely would never want to go without changing the oil in your car. And in the case of your Cutco, you've already paid for it. Right? So you look for different metaphors or analogies to make your point. And then if you're trying to close a service call and they give you any challenges with the scheduling, a phrase that I like to use, and I use this when scheduling demos too, is I'd say, Mrs. Jones, what is the time that you know you're going to be home anyways? And I'm working so hard right now, I will make it work. That's kind of like the desperation close. But it works really well. You're trying to get the service call, you're trying to get the demo, they want to see you, but you just can't make it work. You just say, what's the time you know you're going to be home anyways? And let me see if I can make that work, okay? Now, a couple other tips when you're scheduling a service call. Always find out what products they have. And the way I would do that is I would say, Mrs. Jones, just so I'm prepared appropriately to sharpen your knives, can you tell me what products you have? And so they go through it. And sometimes I would, just for fun, they tell me I've got a trimmer, a spatula, paring knife, and some table knives. And I'd say, and did you say you had the bread knife as well? Oh, you didn't? Okay. All right. And did you say you had the chef knife? Okay. All right. Sometimes I'll throw out a couple popular ones just to see if they bite or make a comment like, oh, yeah, I should have one of those. But I'm trying to find out what they have. And then one of the things I might do is I might build some rapport before I hang up from the service call. And before I hang up, I might throw out there, I might say, Mrs. Jones, is there anything that you'd like, are there any samples you'd like me to bring? Since I'll be there anyways, it can always be more enjoyable to see the samples in your hand than seeing them in a catalog. That's kind of a test close to see, is there anything that they've been interested in? And you'll be surprised how often you can ask that question, and they go, yeah, I was looking at this knife, or my sister has this one. So that's a great question. You say, hey, since I'm going to be there anyways, are there any samples you want me to make sure I bring? Which is, of course, kind of a funny question. Some of you are laughing at that because you're thinking, I'm going to bring them all anyways. But the customer doesn't necessarily know that, and, maybe they throw out some knife you don't have, and you got to make sure you have it. Last thing I'll tell you about closing the service call, appointment at least, is you don't ever have to ask the customer for more than 15 to 20 minutes. You can let them know, hey, the servicing can take between 10 and 20 minutes. If it takes any longer, it's because you like me and we end up hanging out. You don't have to ask for a lot of time. So those should be easy for you to close or schedule. So I'll open it up for questions in a couple minutes so you can tell me if that helped you. All right. Let me give you a couple thoughts on the actual demo phone approach. Hopefully what we talked about around scheduling earlier was helpful, as well as the service call approach. Here's a couple thoughts on the demo phone approach. First of all, some of you heard me talk about this the other day. Make sure that you come across as casual and, if possible, playful. And when I say casual and playful, what I'm talking about is you want to come across the way a good friend would come across on the phone. All right? You don't want to come across as somebody, trying to sell something. You don't want to come across as somebody who's doing something that's so serious or so formal that you can't just have fun. So whenever possible, use humor in whatever way you can. Here's a big one. When you're making your phone calls, now this is something you learned on day one, but it's so easy to stray from doing this. Remember that when you're on the phone, you shouldn't be selling the product. Make sure you're always playing down the product. When people would ask me, what's the product, aside from using a humorous answer, which I would every time, oftentimes I'd end up saying something like, Mrs. Jones, I could be showing you picture frames and it doesn't really matter. All that matters is that you like me because I get credit just for seeing you. So I wouldn't tell them it's some really nice stuff for the kitchen, because as soon as I say really nice stuff, now I'm selling them. I would always play it down. I'd say it's some products for the kitchen. And if they sound intrigued or interested, I say, oh, if you like being in the kitchen, then you'll actually really enjoy this. Or if they sound like they're not interested, I say, by the way, if you don't like being in the kitchen, that's great. The appointment will be even faster, but we'll still have fun. The point is, no matter what they said, I would play down the product and play up myself, okay? Let me share a couple thoughts around how you can handle it when customers give you objections around when they can see you, okay? The first solution to making sure that you can get a hold of the customers or you can get the demos when you want them is to make sure that you've qualified the reps or qualified the referrals in advance. There's no easier way to have problem scheduling than to not know if somebody works or they don't work. So you got to do that in advance if and when you can. When you are talking to somebody and they give you a little bit of trouble scheduling the appointment, the key here is to take what they give you and work around it, and to make sure that you're ready with what's your next two choices of times. Because if you're trying to close an appointment on the phone and you hesitate because of their objection, they're going to sense that and they'll take advantage of you. So when I say to the customer, hey, I could see you Monday at 1:07 or 3:52, if she says, John, I can't see you there, that's when I pick my kids up from school. What I've got to do is I've got to be prepared to immediately take what they just gave me and work around it. So oftentimes when people give you the objection, the nice thing is they'll give you a clue or a hint, or they'll give you something that you can use. So I might ask for 1:15 or 3:42, and the customer might say, oh, John, I can't do that. I leave at 3 o'clock to go pick my kids up from school. Whatever they give me, I take what they give me and I work around it. So let me use that exact example. Let's say somebody said, no, I can't. I leave at 3 to get my kids at school. What I'm going to do is I'm not going to take that as a no. I'm going to take it as a no, the customer and I have not yet found a time that they believe will work for them. So what I might do is I might listen to what they say. They say, no, I got to leave at 3. And I'm going to say, well, Mrs. Jones, I could come a little bit earlier at 1:30, and I can guarantee I'll be out of there in time. Or actually, frankly, I could still show up at 2, and I'll be out of there in time. Or, Ms. Jones, I could come a little bit later at 4, and that would work as well. So I'm taking what they gave me, and I'm working around it. But I'm always prepared for somebody to say, no, these times don't work. In fact, I think that's the sign of a really top rep, is they realize when they make phone calls that more often than not, when you ask someone for the appointment, it's not going to work because you're not psychic. You don't know what their schedule is, so you should expect to have to work around what they give you. It should be a surprise if every time you ask someone for an appointment, they're available. So be prepared for that. Here's another example. Let's say you didn't qualify the lead well enough, and you call them and you say, could I be there at 2 or 4 o'clock? And they go, John, I work. I'm not going to be home till 5:30, so those times aren't going to work. So here's what I'm going to do. If I don't need to have a phone session that particular night, and I can determine that before I make the phone call, if I don't need to have a phone session, I'm going to turn around and say to the customer, they just told me, no, I can't do that. I don't get home till 5:30. I'll say, well, Mrs. Jones, I'm working really hard, and I'd actually be willing to see you at either 6:30 or 7:45. Which of those gives you enough time to unwind from work? So did you catch that right there? I'm taking what they gave me, and I'm working around it. And I'm also being respectful as well by saying which of those gives you enough time to unwind from your work. Because when people come home from a day at work, you don't know what their work's like. You don't know that they don't come home exhausted. So you got to be respectful of that. So remember, when people give you challenges, take what they give you, work around it, and expect it, but make sure that you're prepared with what are the next 2 times you're going to offer. And if you really want to be good at this, be prepared with the next 2 after that. Now, here's how you kind of get it to the next level, is how to be pleasantly persistent. Let's talk about this. If somebody tells you they've got a vacation planned, or they're packing boxes, or there's some other reason why they can't see you, I often would offer people a treat. I would say, like if I'm trying to get a midday appointment and they can't see me and they give me some reason that I sit there and think, well, that's not a real reason. Because the bottom line is everybody could give you 30, 45 minutes. Everybody can. It's a matter of can you make them feel good about giving you that time. So if somebody says, I can't see you, I say, Ms. Jones, look, I'm working so hard. What do you want for lunch? I'll bring you your favorite sandwich. Where's your favorite place to get lunch? I'll bring you some lunch. Or if I'm getting a mid-morning appointment, I'll say, what's your favorite drink at Starbucks? I'll bring you your favorite coffee drink. Heck, I'll bring you 2 of them. If they tell me they're getting ready for a vacation, I might make a joke. I say, hey, I'll show up an hour early. I'll do yard work for you, or I'll help you pack your bags. I had a customer once tell me they were moving and they were packing boxes. I told him, I said, Ms. Jones, I can pack boxes faster than anybody you've ever met. And the crazy thing was they took me up on the offer, and I really wasn't any good at packing boxes, so I had to learn before I got there. But I showed up 30 minutes early. I actually packed a few boxes, and the lady couldn't believe it. She gave me a demo, and she bought a bunch of knives. So offer something to show them that you are pleasantly persistent. Guarantee that they'll enjoy you, and if they don't enjoy you in the first 10 minutes, you'll zip yourself up and kick yourself out. Do whatever you need to do to show them that you really want to meet them. The last thing I'm going to say about working around difficult customers that make it tough for you to get an appointment is there is a shortcut. And the shortcut is really simple. If you can establish some kind of common ground with the customer or something else to talk about other than your demo, then you will find it's much, much, much easier to get an appointment. This is why the most important step to take when you're trying to get good at scheduling appointments is actually qualifying your referrals. Because if you find out something of interest that you can share as a common ground or an interesting topic, or maybe they have young kids that are just started playing Little League Baseball and you can, teach their kids a few things, or whatever it is, if you can find something that's common and make that an even more interesting reason to meet than just the demo, you'll find that phone time can become really easy. Now, I've got just a closing thought here around phone time, and I'm going to give all of you one creative idea and then the closing thought. The creative idea is this. When you talk to somebody who already owns Cutco, for example, you're scheduling a service call appointment, don't be afraid to ask for leads right there on the phone. this was a little trick that I came up with, and it just kind of happened on accident. It happened on accident during a push period. But what I did is I was on the phone with somebody, and I had a blank day on my calendar. I was doing morning phone time. And it was about 9 o'clock, and I scheduled someone for a 10 a.m. service call. And I decided that the best thing I could do would just be to tell my customer what my goals were. So I told him before we hung up, before we finished scheduling that service call, I said, Ms. Jones, just so you know, I'm trying to see as many people as I can right now. My goal is actually to see 50 people this week. And right now I've got a few openings today. Is there anybody else in your neighborhood who you know who owns any Cutco who I could call them and see if I could service them as well? And I'll never forget the first person I asked that of, they gave me 7 names and numbers, and 3 of them I saw that day. And that became a regular practice of mine, is every time I'd schedule a service call before hanging up, I'd ask them for more leads, because often they know of neighbors who also own the product. So just something to think about there. All right, here's my final closing idea for all of you, and then I'll do what I can to kind of open up the phone line if there's any questions. My final closing thought really has a lot to do, again, with your mentality during a push period. During a push period, I often would look at it as a game. And the interesting thing is what Vector taught me during these push periods ended up carrying over and helping me in a lot of other areas in my life. One of them of which was actually a hobby that I developed, which was running ultra marathons. And there are some of you who may have heard me tell stories about this before, but I can share with all of you that some of my experiences running ultra marathons, I've had a chance to run 50 miles at a time, 100 miles at a time, even longer than that. And I've had moments when I'm trying to run that far where I catch myself laughing, thinking, this is so funny. This is what I get for that knife job, because that knife job taught me so much about how to push beyond my limits. And I think one of the things that Vector taught me that I carried over into running these ultra marathons that I want to give back to you to use in Vector is that when you can find a way to take an experience that maybe you are currently defining it as painful, and you can redefine it or give it a new meaning as playful, you can do things that you've never done before. So as an example, I can think of the first time I ever attempted running 100 miles consecutively. There was a point at the 60 or 70 mile mark where I realized I would only be able to go on if I could redefine how I was interpreting the physical experience. So I was taking that physical experience and reminding myself that instead of thinking, man, this is just going to kill me, I would say, wow, this is going to make me stronger, or this is why I signed up for this, or this is going to change me forever. And I'm going to tell you, when you go out there and you try and make 30, 40, 50 phone calls every single day, or 80 or 100 every day, that can be very difficult. And it can be difficult because you might not be used to dealing with that much rejection, but you might need to think about it a little differently. You might need to realize that people aren't rejecting you as a person. They're just rejecting what you're offering. Or if you don't get people answering the phone, you got to realize you couldn't control that. It doesn't matter. So it all just turns into a game at some point. And when you can do that and have fun with it, you'll find that you can persist and create energy and motivation when otherwise you may have given up. So I just wanted to leave all of you with that thought. I think of anything that matters most, your ability to make it a game and to have fun with it is probably the most important. Hey, at this point, I'm going to try and unmute all of you. So I'm going to press a few buttons.
John.
Okay, so everybody is muted at this point. If any of you have a question, you would press *6, and that will unmute yourself. So if any of you have a question about anything I shared, go ahead and press *6, and it will unmute you.
Mr. Burghoff.
Please, go ahead.
This is David Young from Gainesville, Florida, and I had a question. I was wondering if you, I actually was driving to a demo when you were giving your approach for the service call, and I was wondering if it was possible that you could email that to Matt King, and that way he can email it to all of us.
Hey, I appreciate the question. I will not be able to email it. I don't have it written up anywhere, but what I can promise you is there is a lot of people on this call who heard it, and maybe somebody could type it up and forward it to Matt. I can guarantee that will get it to happen much sooner than if you waited for me to sit down and write it out.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have it typed out. I can send it to Matt King.
Thank you very much. Who's that?
Roger Gonzalez. I'm from the Tampa office, Spring Hill now.
All right, you all owe Roger a free lunch.
Okay.
All right, cool. All right, who else has a question? Please, fire away. And you got to press *6 if you want to open up your own phone line to ask a question. *6.
Hello?
Yes, please, go ahead.
All right, I have a quick question. I'm Emily from Orlando, and my question is on regular appointments, because I haven't learned how to do service calling yet. So right now, my push period is going to be primarily talking and doing demos for people that, A, don't have Cutco, B, already have it, but I just know how to do the demo only. So how do you cut those demos into smaller portions? Because building rapport I've gotten better at, but then I spend so much time building rapport, like 20 minutes, and then I have this small section to do my presentation. So I'm wondering how I can cut down the presentation time so that then I can book more demos in the day.
Okay, that's a really good question. Let me just clarify to make sure I understood the question. Emily, is your primary question, how do you get the demo as short as possible so that you can do more demos in the day?
Yes, because I don't know how to do service calling, so doing a demo 20, 30 minutes really isn't something I can do.
Good, okay. Good. So let me give you a couple thoughts on that. So first of all, Emily, one of the things that I've found is that a lot of reps, especially when they're newer, they take a little longer than they might need to during the demo. And the reason they might take longer than they need to is if they are saying the same thing a number of different ways. And so, and of course, I don't know if you're doing this. So one of the things that I have encouraged a lot of reps to do is actually record their demo, even if it's just audio. You don't need to see it, but with audio, and then go through it and listen and ask yourself, am I saying too much? I used to ask reps to practice explaining to me the purpose of each section of the demo. And I would ask them, okay, tell me the purpose of company history page. What's the purpose in 30 seconds? Right? Or what's the purpose in 10 seconds? What's the purpose of the junk knife page in 1 minute? What's the purpose of features and benefits? And I think it's good to get really clear on, hey, what am I trying to get across here? And the reason why that's a good thing is because, Emily, sometimes you'll notice that if the purpose of company history page is to build credibility, well, instead of taking a full 5 minutes to go through it, if you can tell that the customer feels the credibility in the first 20 seconds, then you could start to abbreviate it. And this is kind of an advanced tip, but my point is you don't have to dwell on certain topics if you can see that a customer gets it. So at the risk of, I don't want to cause any problems because I know there's probably a lot of new people on the phone, but what's important is to also not miss the things that make all the difference. You don't want to skip any of the cutting demos that you know make a huge difference.
Yeah, that's what I really don't want to do.
Yeah. So I don't know if that helped at all, but pay attention to each section of the demo and make sure you're not over-explaining anything that's not critical to that section.
Okay.
Mr. Burghoff?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
This is Roger, again, from the Spring Hill office. What I was wondering is when you get, because I tend to run into people who spend a lot of time working, and then, I try to transfer my enthusiasm onto them, but they just seem like they're dead almost. And a lot of times I get, people saying, I don't get a whole lot of extra time, and when I do have that extra time, I want to spend it with my kids. What's, the best way that you would say to handle that objection without, seeming too, desperate or pushy or anything?
Yeah. No, that's a good question. Well, that's understandable. I can tell you as a parent myself, my wife and I have a 2 and a 3-year-old, and I don't know if anybody could get a demo in for anything with me. So On one hand, I can understand where a parent is coming from. On the other hand, that's where it helps to make sure you really qualify your referrals. So when you're getting referrals, it's fine if you're seeing people who work, but what's important is if that's an objection you're running into more than just a couple times, then what that means is when you get your leads, you've got to ask whoever's giving you the lead, say, hey, tell me something about each of these people. For example, when someone would give me 10 referrals, I would ask the customer, I'd say, okay, who are the first 5 that you would call? So I'd hone in on whoever they thought were the best leads. And then I'd go through those 5, if it's that, and I'd say, tell me something about each of these people that can help me to connect with them. Tell me something, have they had any major significant life events, positive events? You know, promotion at work, just had their kitchen remodeled, new home, big vacations, have their kids accomplished anything noteworthy in school, anything like that. So when you're making your calls, you can build rapport over these interesting things in their life more than just over trying to get a demo. So you've got to find a way to build that connection on the phone if that's what you keep running into. Unfortunately, that's a challenge. It's not easy, but that's obviously it's where you've got to figure out how to connect a little more. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, definitely. And another thing, like, because what I tried to do a couple times is say, like, oh, you know, we'll have fun. Like, I'll get your kids involved. It's not like, you know, we're gonna have your kids go sit like in the closet while I borrow some of your time. Like, I don't say it in those specific words, but like I was wondering if there was like some like good phrasing that you could use to let them know that it's not gonna be like, you know, they're sitting through an hour of a high school class, like taking notes and stuff, and letting them know that it's not going to be like super, super boring, and the kids are going to be involved in stuff.
Well, so this is a great question. I'm glad you're asking this because this probably applies to a lot of people. It's okay to tell them that what you're going to do is really entertaining for the kids. Just make sure that if you say that, you actually have the ability to follow through on that. And if you do, then you're good. But here's the other thing. This actually goes back to your phone approach. When I used to make calls, if I was calling Matt and saying, hey, Matt, Jamie referred me to you, I would always use the line, I'd say, Matt, the reason Jamie gave me your name is because she thought you'd enjoy hanging out with me. I would always use that phrase. Say, the reason Jamie gave me your name, she and I had a ton of fun, and she thought you'd have a blast hanging out with me. So I make it all about hanging out with me, and none of it has to do with the demo. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that definitely helps.
All right, cool. Awesome. Great question. All right, who else has any questions? Any questions at all around the phone? Please, go ahead.
This is Grace from Tampa. Now, after you firm up your service call, do you have them write it down, and when you give the confirmation number, do you tell them that that also doubles as their discount code, or do you kind of keep that out of the phone approach?
Oh, I like that idea. I don't know that I ever would give them a confirmation number, but that's brilliant.
Yeah.
That's really cool. No, I would always confirm the appointment. I'd ask them, although if I told them earlier that I'm already going to be on their street, it wouldn't make sense to ask for directions, but I would ask them to write it down. And I love that idea of giving them a confirmation code, and that doubles as a discount code. That's brilliant. That's great.
Oh, okay. Good. Thanks.
Yeah, that was your idea, not mine.
Well, I heard that from probably Aaron Luden or somebody else.
Oh, if you heard it from Aaron, then I guarantee he heard it from me. So that was my idea. All right. Any other questions out there related to
I have one quick question.
Yeah, please go.
Hey, I'm Trent from Gainesville. I was just wondering, what's like your best like funny joke you like to say on the phone, you know, just to get people laughing and stuff.
Hey, sorry, it was a little quiet on the phone on my end, probably because I'm sitting on a busy street. Could you tell me the question again?
Yeah, what's like your best joke that you like to use on the phone?
Well, Gosh, my best jokes are probably nowhere near as good as what a lot of you are using, but I don't know if I had a best joke. Anytime the customer would ask how long is it going to take, I'd always tell them, do you want the long version or the short version?
Okay.
And if they say the short version, I'd say, well, that's easy. You just give me your credit card note right now. I'd say, no, the long version is only 7 or 8 years. But I think we'll really get to like each other, right? But do you have a spare bedroom? I have my own sleeping bag, but I definitely need a new pillow. I mean, I would have fun with that. If they ask what's the product, I would tell them space food or, plastic explosives or sharks with laser beams or, anything silly, just to prove to them that I was, at least a little bit fun. And I'll make one comment about this, too. It's important to know how to tell a joke. I don't know how many of you are still on the phone who you might know somebody who's really bad at telling a joke. You probably know someone who's so bad at telling a joke that when you see them telling a joke, you'll cut them off halfway through so that you could finish it for them. And some of you might be that person right now. And you got to make sure that when you tell your customer a joke, you slow down and you enunciate, and then you pause at the end so that they hear what you said. Because if you go too fast or you don't pause or they don't understand you, then they'll just think you're weird. They'll think you're strange because of what you said. So you got to pause and give it time to land, give them time to realize it's a joke. And then you have to be prepared to laugh at yourself if they don't laugh so they realize it was a joke. So I think that's important, too, is the actual delivery.
Okay. All right, I have a question.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Dominique from the Gainesville office. Is there a way to approach someone on the phone to ask for more leads on the phone, like you do with your service calls?
Yeah, I think I talked about that today.
You do it with service calls who don't have Cutco.
Oh, with people who don't have Cutco? I don't know if I've ever done that. Because it's a very natural thing to get leads if they do have Cutco.
Okay.
If they don't have Cutco, I guess you'd have to have a ton of rapport for them to give you leads, especially if they don't even know what it is you're getting a lead for, right?
Okay.
So I don't know that I've ever done that.
Mr. Burghoff?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Hi, my name's Leah Wilson. I'm from the Orlando office. I appreciate your time. I was wondering, I've had a problem with, building rapport with people who don't want to build rapport. What is your best tip on that?
Yeah. It sounds like you got a streak of mean people, huh?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, what you got to do is you got to get a shirt. You got to get a shirt that says, I don't like mean people. or a big sticker on the front of your binder that says, nice people only or something. No,
right.
I'm kidding, of course. Well, I think there's a few things that I think about when I think about if you feel like you're consistently not able to build rapport with people. There's a couple things that come to mind. One is try and use the phone call when you get the appointment to build rapport. In fact, I regularly used to make it a goal of mine, and the goal was, after I get the appointment, how long can I stay on the phone before I hang up? How long can I stay on the phone building rapport? And it wasn't uncommon for me to spend 5 more minutes talking to the customer after I got the appointment. If I could find a way to connect right there, then it would really break the ice when I showed up. Now, once you show up, and you're still having problems building the rapport, I think a couple things to think about. One is make sure that you're not leaning on your demo as a crutch. In fact, I used to challenge myself. I would leave my sample kit in the car, and I'd go to the front door just to force myself to find a way to connect. And sometimes it'd be a little awkward. They go, where's your stuff? But they don't always know that I need to have any stuff. So I would see if I could connect with them, and then on my own terms decide when we were going to start. And sometimes that worked, sometimes it didn't. But I think the biggest thing there is when you walk into the house, look for some sort of common ground. Look for something that you can authentically care about or get interested in. And then ask them really good questions to get them to open up about things that they care about. And once you can get them talking, I mean, the key is to get them talking. If you're doing all the talking, it's hard for people to like you. You got to get them talking about things that they want to talk about. Ask them for advice. Ask them about positive things in their lives, like where or when they met their spouse, or why they fell in love with their spouse, or best vacation they've been on, or what advice they'd give you. Something positive. So I don't know if that helps at all.
Something
the T-shirt idea may have been the best.
Something that I noticed that even like when you, John, when you were asking, like presenting like types of questions you might ask, is you want to make sure you're asking like open-ended questions, because it's easy for people to shut down if you're like, oh, do you have any kids? Have you gone on vacation recently? And then they're like, no. Like, you just want to make sure you don't ask them questions they can give a one-word answer to.
Yeah, great point. Thanks for chiming in.
Hello, Mr.
All
Burghoff.
right. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Hi, my name is James Bryan. I'm from the Lake City office. And as of late, I've been in a little bit of a slump from recommendations. I'm kind of running low on them. So I was wondering if you had the best tip to getting to that 20 recommendations on every appointment.
Could you share the question one more time? Sorry, where I'm at, my phone cut out in the middle of your question. Sorry about that.
No worries. Well, I've been in a slump as of late with recommendations. I'm kind of running out. So I was wondering if you could give me like your number one tip on how to get to that extra 20 recommendations.
Yeah, my number one tip is to find somebody who was on the conference call that I ran on Wednesday and have them walk through what I shared on that call. On Wednesday, I ran a call where I spent about 45 minutes breaking it all down. So whatever I could do right now in 1 minute would not give justice to what we did on Wednesday. So find somebody who could sit down and walk you through everything I covered, because I gave kind of a step-by-step everything that I would do to get a lot of referrals. I think it'll help.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Burghoff?
Yeah, you guys got to call me John, please.
Hey, John, it's Jose from the Orlando office.
Awesome. Jose, you're going to get the last question here because I got to run.
Okay, is there a way to call people who promised you Rex when you did the appointment but never gave you any, and ensure that they'll get you the people they said they originally would?
Well, yeah, I like to use threats, so I would threaten them. No. You know, this might not be the answer that you want to hear, but I think I'm just still going to share what I'm thinking, and that's that